Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories every week, join our membership. Sit back, relax, and sip your coffee. Enjoy. 3 months ago, I buried my wife in the hard, unforgiving soil of Harlan County. The coroner said it was a brain aneurysm, sudden, unpredictable, unstoppable. April was 32. We'd been married for 8 years, no kids. The day she died, we'd argued about something stupid, me leaving dirty dishes in the sink again. I remember her face flushed with anger as she stormed out to go to work at the elementary school. I never saw her alive again. After the funeral, I couldn't stand our apartment in Louisville anymore. Every corner held a memory. Every room echoed with her absence. I quit my job at UPS, packed what I could fit in my 2009 Honda Civic, and drove east into the mountains where my grandmother had grown up. I needed somewhere quiet, somewhere different, somewhere I could dissolve into nothing, and no one would notice. That's how I ended up in Whitley Gap, a forgotten smudge along Route 119, near the Virginia border, population 783, according to the sun-bleached welcome sign, though that number must have been painted 20 years ago. The town sits in a narrow valley, where the mountains press in close, with just enough flat land for a main street, a couple of churches, and a smattering of houses that climb the lower slopes of the surrounding hills. I rented a small cabin on Pine Mountain Road for almost nothing, $450 a month, utilities included. The landlord, an old man named Buford Jenkins, seemed surprised anyone wanted it. Been empty 3 years since my nephew moved to Cincinnati, he told me, pocketing my deposit without counting it. Might need some airing out. It needed more than airing out. It needed a deep, clean, new weather stripping, and probably an exorcism. But it was mine, and April had never set foot in it. That was enough. When my savings started dwindling faster than expected, I knew I needed work. Options are limited in a place like Whitley Gap. The coal mines that once sustained the area are mostly shuttered now, leaving behind black lung disease and generations of bitterness. There's the Dollar General, the post office, a gas station convenience store combo, and Wilder's Market, the only proper grocery store for 20 miles in any direction. I applied at Wilder's because it was closest to my cabin. The manager, Daryl Wilder himself, hired me on the spot when I said I could start immediately. No background check, no references, just a quick once-over and a nod. I got the impression he was desperate. Night shift only, he said, watching me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Stocking shelves 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., $14 an hour. Cash every Friday. I took it without hesitation. After April, I wasn't sleeping much anyway. Might as well get paid for those endless, empty hours. That was when he handed me a sheet of paper. Rules for working the night shift at Wilder's Market. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Daryl Wilder's rules were typed on a yellowed piece of paper, clearly run through a printer countless times. Coffee stains dotted the corners, and the edges were worn soft like cloth. I read them in my car under the flickering parking lot light, before my first shift. Night shift rules, Wilder's Market. 1. Always enter and exit through the back door. Front doors remain locked at all times. 2. Complete stocking in this order: dairy, frozen, canned goods, produce, beverages, household items. 3. The lights in the meat department will turn off at 2:13 a.m. Do not turn them back on until 4:37 a.m. 4. If you hear whistling from aisle 7, continue working but do not enter that aisle until the whistling stops. 5. Should you find wet footprints leading to the employee restroom, use the customer facilities instead. 6. If a woman with red hair asks where we keep the baby formula, direct her to aisle 3, even if we've moved it. 7. The delivery truck arrives at 3 a.m. Only accept packages from Jim or Calloway. If anyone else is driving, lock the back door and call Mr. Wilder immediately. 8. If the lights flicker 3 times in succession, drop what you're doing and go to the break room for exactly 7 minutes. I stared at the list, reading it twice more. Was this some kind of joke? A hazing ritual for the new guy? I almost drove home, but I needed the money. I'd give it one night at least. If Daryl Wilder was messing with me, I'd walk out and try the Dollar General instead. At 9:55 p.m., I parked behind the store as instructed. The loading dock stood empty under a single sodium light that cast everything in sickly orange. The mountains loomed in the darkness beyond, a deeper black against the night sky. A metal door with peeling gray paint waited at the top of a short flight of concrete steps. The other night stalker was already inside, leaning against a pallet jack when I entered. He was a tall, lanky man with a patchy beard and deep-set eyes that looked perpetually tired. "Nathan Powell," he said, extending a rough hand. "You must be the new guy from Louisville." I introduced myself, surprised that he knew where I was from. "Small town," Nathan explained with a hollow laugh. "Everybody knows everything about everybody by sundown the day they arrive. You took the Jenkins cabin up on Pine Mountain." He handed me a box cutter and gestured toward a stack of pallets loaded with merchandise. "Let's get started. I'm guessing Daryl gave you the rules." "Yeah," I said, testing the blade. "What's that about? Some kind of joke?" Nathan's face went still, his expression careful. "Follow those rules exactly," he said after a pause. "Don't ask why. Don't test them. Don't get creative. Just do what they say." I waited for him to crack a smile to let me in on the prank, but his eyes remained deadly serious. "Okay," I said slowly, "starting with dairy then." For the first hour, everything was normal. We unloaded pallets, broke down boxes, and stocked shelves in the precisely ordered sequence Daryl had stipulated. Nathan was efficient, but not talkative, answering my questions with minimal responses. "You from around here?" I asked as we loaded gallons of milk into the refrigerated cases. "Born and raised," he replied, "except for 4 years in the Army, 2 tours in Afghanistan." "What brought you back?" His hand stilled momentarily. "Nowhere else to go." At midnight, the store felt cavernous. Our footsteps echoed off the high ceiling as we worked our way through canned goods. I was organizing a display of Green Giant corn when I heard it, a soft melodic whistling coming from several aisles over. I froze, my hand halfway to the shelf. The tune was unfamiliar, eerie in the empty store. It rose and fell in unusual intervals that sounded wrong somehow, like a familiar melody played in a minor key. I looked at Nathan, who had gone completely still beside me. His face had drained of color, and he shook his head slightly when I opened my mouth to speak. The whistling continued for nearly 2 minutes. I counted every second, my heart pounding against my ribs. When it finally stopped, Nathan exhaled shakily. "Aisle 7?" I whispered. He nodded once, then continued stocking as if nothing had happened. 20 minutes later, I couldn't stand it anymore. "What was that?" I asked. "Rule number 4, Nathan replied without looking at me. "You followed it. Good. But what? Don't." He cut me off. "Just don't, man. Not tonight." We worked in silence until 1:30 a.m. when Nathan announced we'd take our break. In the cramped employee room, he finally relaxed slightly, pulling a squashed sandwich from his backpack. "Look," he said after taking a bite. "I know the rules seem weird. They are weird. but they're there for a reason. Which is... He set down his sandwich. This town has history. Bad history. The store sits on land that used to be part of the old Whitley mine before the collapse of '58. What collapse? 47 miners died when the main shaft caved in. They could only recover 22 bodies. The rest are still down there, somewhere beneath us. Nathan's eyes drifted to the linoleum floor. My grandfather was one of them. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed and flickered once, making both of us look up. They closed the mine after that, filled in what they could, built this shopping center in the '80s. Nathan crumpled his sandwich wrapper. Break's over in 2 minutes. Ready for the meat department? It's 2:10. As we walked back onto the floor, I felt a strange heaviness in the air, a pressure like the moments before a thunderstorm. The meat department was at the far end of the store, the white tile gleaming under bright lights. 3 minutes. Nathan checked his watch. Remember Rule 3. At exactly 2:13 a.m., every light in the meat department shut off in unison. The darkness in the meat department was absolute. The glow from other sections of the store barely penetrated the blackness that had swallowed the butcher counter, display cases, and preparation area. "Don't worry about it," Nathan said, his voice eerily calm. "We'll move on to produce, then come back at 4:37. I pulled out my phone to use as a flashlight. Nathan's hand shot out and gripped my wrist with surprising strength. "No lights," he hissed. "No phones, no lighters, nothing. Rule 3 isn't just about the main switches." I slipped my phone back into my pocket, the skin on my arms prickling. "What happens if I turn on a light?" Nathan released my wrist. Bobby Leeson tried that last year, used his Zippo to find a box of steaks he'd dropped. His voice dropped lower. "Found something else instead." "What did he find?" "He doesn't work here anymore." Nathan turned away. "Let's set up the banana display." As we arranged fruit in the produce section, I kept glancing toward the meat department. The darkness seemed to have substance, like it was slowly bleeding outward into neighboring aisles. I blinked and looked again. Just my imagination. "You said your grandfather died in the mine collapse," I said, trying to distract myself. "Is that why you came back after the army?" Nathan carefully positioned a pineapple. "Partly. My grandmother was still alive then. Dementia died her last winter." He paused, weighing his next words. "But I also came back because of the dreams." "Dreams?" "Started in Afghanistan. Dreams about this place. About coming home to find everyone gone. Walking through empty houses where dinner was still on the table. Cars still in driveways, but no people. Just whistling in the distance." He shook his head. "PTSD, the doc said. But I knew it wasn't that. It was a warning. I didn't know how to respond." Nathan seemed completely sincere, his eyes focused on some middle distance as he spoke. "You new folks think Whitley Gap is just another dying coal town," he continued. "But it's more than that. There's a reason property's so cheap here. Reason the young people leave as soon as they can." The overhead speakers crackled suddenly, making me jump. A burst of static filled the store, followed by what sounded like a distant voice speaking words I couldn't quite make out. "Ignore it," Nathan said, not even looking up. "Just the old PA system acting up." But it didn't sound like system feedback to me. It sounded like a man calling for help, his voice muffled, as if coming from somewhere deep underground. At 2:45 a.m., we reached the beverage aisle. Nathan was in the middle of explaining how to arrange the soda display when I saw it. A dark puddle spreading from beneath the double doors that led to the stockroom. "Nathan," I said, pointing to the growing stain on the linoleum. He followed my gaze and swore under his breath. "Back up," he ordered, setting down the case of Mountain Dew he'd been holding. "Don't touch it. Don't even get close." The liquid continued to seep forward, thick and dark. In the fluorescent lighting, it had a rusty, reddish-black sheen. "Is that blood?" I whispered. "Just don't touch it," Nathan repeated. He glanced at his watch. "It's almost 3. The delivery truck will be here soon." As if on cue, I heard the rumble of a diesel engine outside, followed by the beating of a truck backing up to the loading dock. Nathan's shoulders visibly relaxed. "Let's go," he said, carefully skirting the edge of the spreading puddle. "You remember Rule 7? I nodded. "Only accept deliveries from Jim or Calloway." "Good. Let's hope it's one of them tonight." We headed to the back of the store. Nathan pushed open the heavy door to the loading dock, letting in a gust of cold mountain air. A white delivery truck with no markings had backed up to the platform, its engine still running. The driver's side door opened, and a heavy-set man with a gray beard climbed down. "Evening, Nathan," the man called, pulling a clipboard from the cab. "Got your usual delivery plus extra flour and sugar. Daryl called it in special yesterday." "Evening, Jim," Nathan replied, his tone normal for the first time that night. "This is the new guy." Jim nodded to me, his eyes crinkled with what might have been sympathy. "First night, huh? Hanging in there." Before I could answer, the passenger door of the truck opened. I hadn't noticed anyone else in the cab. A tall, rail-thin man stepped out, moving with an odd, jerky gait. He wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face. Nathan went completely still beside me. "Jim," he said quietly. "Who's that?" Jim turned, confusion crossing his features. "What?" "Nobody. I came alone tonight." The thin man was moving toward the back of the truck now, his movements becoming more fluid with each step. Jim followed my gaze, his eyes widening. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, backing away. That ain't nobody I know." Nathan pushed me back through the door. "Inside," he ordered. "Lock this. Call Daryl." "What about Jim?" I asked, stumbling backward. "Now!" Nathan roared, shoving me fully inside before pulling the door shut with a metallic clang. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn it. Through the small safety glass window, I saw Nathan backing Jim toward the truck, both men watching the approaching figure. The stranger had stopped advancing, standing unnaturally still at the edge of the loading dock's pool of light. Though I couldn't see his face clearly, I knew he was staring directly at me through the window. As I watched, he tilted his head at an impossible angle, nearly touching his shoulder with his ear. Then, with jerky movements like a marionette with tangled strings, he began to raise his hand toward his face. Nathan pounded on the door. "Call Daryl!" he shouted, his voice muffled through the thick metal. "Rule 7! Call him!" I stumbled backwards, breaking eye contact with the stranger, and pulled out my phone. Daryl's number was posted above the time clock. With trembling fingers, I dialed. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting by the phone. "Who's driving?" he demanded without preamble. "Not Jim or Calloway," I stammered. "There's a man, a thin man in a baseball cap." Nathan locked me inside and... "Is the door secured?" Daryl cut me off. "Yes, but Nathan and Jim are still out there with..." "Listen carefully," Daryl said, his voice tight with urgency. "Go to aisle 7. There's a trapdoor behind the display of paper towels. Pull the green lever underneath and wait there until I arrive. Do not open the back door for anyone. Not Nathan, not Jim, not me, not Jesus Christ himself, until you see my face through the window and I show you my store key with the red tag. Do you understand?" "What about Nathan and Jim?" I repeated. "Do you understand?" Daryl shouted. "Yes," I whispered. "Go. Now." I hung up and looked back through the window. Nathan and Jim were both pressed against the truck now. The thin stranger had moved closer, fully in the light. He had his hand on his face, not covering it but gripping it, fingers digging into the skin near his hairline. As I watched in horror, he began to pull downward, stretching the skin like rubber. Beneath it wasn't blood or muscle or bone, but darkness, absolute blackness without feature or form. I tore myself away from the window and ran toward aisle 7, the sound of fingernails scraping against metal following me through the empty store. I sprinted through the empty store, my footsteps echoing off the high ceiling. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, seeming dimmer than before. At aisle 7, paper products and cleaning supplies, I skidded to a stop, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The display of Bounty paper towels stood at the far end, stacked in a neat pyramid. I rushed toward it, glancing back over my shoulder every few steps. No sign of the thin man, but I could hear something moving in the store now. A dragging sound followed by irregular footsteps, coming from the direction of the loading dock. The paper towel display was heavier than it looked. I pushed with my shoulder, feeling it slide reluctantly across the linoleum. Beneath it was a square metal hatch flush with the floor, with no visible handle. It looked like a service access panel, the kind that might lead to water lines or electrical conduits. In the center was a small keyhole, with a faded green lever beside it. The dragging sound grew louder. With shaking hands, I pulled the lever. It moved stiffly, as if rarely used. The hatch released with a soft hiss, revealing a dark opening and the top of a metal ladder descending into blackness. I hesitated for only a second before climbing down, pulling the hatch closed above me. It shut with a definitive clang, plunging me into complete darkness. The sound of my own breathing filled my ears as I carefully felt my way down the rungs. The ladder extended farther than I expected, much farther. I climbed down 20, 30, maybe 40 feet before my foot finally touched solid ground. The air here was cool and damp, with a mineral smell that reminded me of caves. I fumbled for my phone, using the screen's glow to illuminate my surroundings. I stood in a narrow tunnel with rough-hewn walls of dark stone. The ceiling was supported by old wooden beams, weathered and cracked with age. The floor was packed dirt with tracks worn into it, as if many feet had traveled this path over many years. A mine tunnel. I was standing in a section of the old Whitley mine. The realization sent a chill through me. Somewhere above, the thing that wasn't Jim's co-driver was searching for me, while Nathan and Jim might be. No, I couldn't think about that now. I needed to wait for Daryl, just as he'd instructed. I took a few hesitant steps forward, the light from my phone casting grotesque shadows on the tunnel walls. The passage extended straight ahead before curving out of sight. Along the walls, I noticed old mining equipment, picks, shovels, helmets, all coated with decades of dust. Some looked as if they'd been abandoned in haste, dropped where workers had stood. Something glinted in the dirt a few yards ahead. I moved closer, pointing my phone light toward it. A pocket watch lay half buried, its brass case tarnished with age. When I crouched to examine it, I saw that the hands had stopped at 2:13. My blood went cold. The exact time the meat department lights went off. A distant sound reached me, feet shuffling on the ladder. Someone was coming down. I extinguished my phone light and pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding. The sound grew clearer, metal rungs creaking under weight. Then a beam of light cut through the darkness, and a familiar voice called out, "It's Daryl Wilder. I have the red-tagged key." Relief flooded through me. I stepped forward, raising my hand to shield my eyes from his flashlight. "Down here." Daryl reached the bottom of the ladder, his heavy footsteps crunching on the packed earth. He was a stocky man in his 50s with thinning gray hair and the perpetually ruddy complexion of someone with high blood pressure. Tonight, his face was pale and sheened with sweat. "Are you hurt?" he asked, scanning me with the flashlight. "No, but Nathan and Jim, they're fine," Daryl cut me off. "That visitor is gone, for now." "What was it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daryl's jaw tightened. "We need to move. It's not safe to stay in one place too long down here, especially near the entrance." He gestured with his flashlight. "This way." I followed him deeper into the tunnel, questions burning in my throat. After several minutes of silent walking, the passage widened into a larger chamber. Battery-powered lanterns hung from the support beams, casting warm pools of light that revealed a makeshift living space. A folding table with chairs, shelves stocked with canned food and water, even a small gas heater. "Emergency shelter," Daryl explained, setting down his flashlight. "Been maintaining it for 20 years now. My father kept it before me." "For what emergency?" I asked, though I was starting to form my own theories. Daryl sank into one of the chairs, suddenly looking much older. "Sit down, son. It's time you learned what you've walked into." I took the seat across from him, waiting. "The Whitley mine wasn't just a coal operation," he began, eyes fixed on the lantern between us. "They dug too deep, opened something that should have stayed buried. The collapse in '58 wasn't an accident. It was intentional, the only way they could think to seal it back up." "Seal what up?" Daryl's eyes met mine. "A hole, a tear between places, our world and somewhere else." He rubbed his face wearily. "The miners called it the Hollow. Said they could hear voices coming from it, see things that couldn't exist." I thought of the strange whistling in aisle 7, the dark liquid seeping under the stockroom doors, the thing that had been peeling off its face like a mask. "The town elders, my father among them, they tried to contain it," Daryl continued. "They poured concrete down the main shaft, dynamited the secondary entrances. For a while they thought it worked, but then people started changing. Changing how? Little things at first, speaking differently, moving oddly. Then bigger things, not being where they should be, not remembering conversations, showing up miles from home with no memory of how they got there. Some disappeared entirely." He tapped his fingers nervously on the table. "Then we figured it out. Whatever was down there, it could wear people, like clothes." A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the thin man peeling back his face to reveal darkness underneath. "Skinwalkers," I whispered. Daryl shook his head. "Not exactly. Skinwalkers are native legends. These are something else. We call them hollows. They come up through the thin places, like the ground under my store, and they take people, replace them. And the rules? They protect against these things. They're boundaries, conditions. The hollows can't break certain patterns. They're bound by rules of their own, times, behaviors, limitations. If we follow our rules, we stay safe in their territory." "Their territory? This is their territory?" Daryl's laugh was bitter. "About 60 years ago, my grandfather made a deal with whatever's down there. The town was dying after the mine closed. No jobs, no future. He offered a bargain, restricted access to our world in exchange for pure prosperity." "What kind of prosperity?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "You've noticed the store is always fully stocked. Never runs out of anything, even when supply trucks can't get through during winter storms. How the produce is always fresh despite being hours from any distribution center." Daryl spread his hands. "They provide. We contain. everyone follows the rules. I stared at him in growing horror. So the entire town knows about this arrangement? The older families do. Newcomers either figure it out and leave, or... He trailed off. Or they become part of it one way or another. And Nathan, Jim, born here, both from mining families, they understand what's at stake. My mind reeled, trying to process what I was hearing. So I'm supposed to just accept this? Work in a store that's supplied by what monsters from another dimension? Interdimensional beings, Daryl corrected, as if the terminology mattered. And yes, if you want to stay in Whitley Gap, that's the deal. We don't talk about it. We follow the rules. We survive. What happens if someone breaks the rules? Daryl's expression darkened. The Hollows get more access. It's how they claim new vessels. I thought about what Nathan had said about Bobby Leeson, who'd lit a match in the dark meat department and found something. A cold realization dawned. He didn't quit, did he? Bobby Leeson. Daryl shook his head slowly. No, but something wearing his face walked into the Cumberland River 3 days later. We found his truck at the bridge, never found him. A heavy silence fell between us. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness beyond the lantern light, the sound echoing through the tunnel. The thing at the loading dock tonight, I finally asked. It was looking for a new vessel. Yes, they've been getting bolder lately. Braking pattern. Daryl checked his watch. It's 4:30, almost time to go back up. The meat department lights come on in 7 minutes. I stared at him incredulously. You expect me to go back to stocking shelves after all this? No, Daryl said, standing up. I expect you to make a choice. Stay and learn our ways, or leave Whitley Gap by sunrise and never come back. He picked up his flashlight. But if you stay, there are more rules you'll need to learn. Rules for living here, not just working at the market. At that moment, the lanterns flickered. Once, twice, 3 times in succession. Daryl's face drained of color. That's not possible, he whispered. Not down here. A low, melodic whistling drifted through the tunnel from somewhere in the darkness beyond our shelter. Someone broke a rule, Daryl said, his voice tight with fear. We need to move. Now. Daryl snatched a backpack from under the table, quickly stuffing it with supplies, flashlights, batteries, a first aid kit, and bottled water. There's another way out, he said, voice low and urgent. Old ventilation shaft that comes up behind the Baptist church on Hickory Street. The whistling grew louder, the tune more distinct. It was the same eerie melody I'd heard in the store earlier, but deeper, slower, like a record played at the wrong speed. What about Nathan and Jim? I asked, backing toward the tunnel entrance Daryl was indicating. If they followed the rules, they'll be safe, Daryl replied, though he didn't sound convinced. That thing at the loading dock shouldn't have been able to get in. Someone broke containment. We hurried down a narrow passage branching off the main tunnel, the ceiling so low we had to stoop. Our flashlight beams bounced off rough walls slick with moisture, illuminating abandoned mining equipment and the occasional support beam. The air grew colder the further we moved, carrying the unmistakable scent of earth and decay. Your grandmother's cabin, Daryl said suddenly as we navigated a tight corner. It's one of the oldest properties in the area. Did you notice anything unusual there? Markings on the walls, strange noises, cold spots? I thought about my little rental on Pine Mountain Road. There was the perpetually cold bathroom, the basement door that never stayed latched, the occasional sound of scratching that I'd attributed to raccoons in the attic. Maybe, I admitted. Why? The hollow places connect to certain buildings in town, old structures mostly. We try to keep them monitored. but your cabin's been empty for years." He glanced back at me. "Might be how they've been getting through." Damn it, I should have checked before Buford rented it out. A faint vibration ran through the ground beneath our feet, sending small cascades of dirt raining down from the ceiling. We froze, holding our breath. "What was that?" I whispered. "They're moving," Daryl replied grimly. "Faster than usual." The whistling had stopped, replaced by a new sound, something like footsteps but not quite. More like the wet slap of flesh on stone, advancing steadily behind us. We broke into a run, no longer bothering with stealth. The tunnel narrowed further, the air growing thin and stale. My lungs burned as we pushed forward, the beam of my flashlight jumping wildly across the walls. Ahead, I could see the passage sloped upward, wooden slats forming crude steps in the steeper sections. Behind us, the slapping sounds accelerated, accompanied now by a low, gurgling moan that made the hair on my neck stand up. "Almost there," Daryl panted, pointing his flashlight toward a metal ladder bolted to the far wall. Above it, a circular hatch was just visible in the ceiling. "That leads to the church basement. Once we're through, they can't follow. Hallowed ground." As we reached the ladder, my flashlight beam swept across the tunnel floor, illuminating something that made my blood freeze. Footprints. Wet, dark footprints leading ahead of us, toward the ladder. Not following behind, but already ahead. "Daryl," I hissed, pointing. He saw them too, his face hardening. "Go, now I'll hold them off." "But, go!" he barked, pulling something from his jacket pocket. A small glass vial filled with dark liquid. "I've done this before." The wet slapping sounds were almost upon us. I scrambled up the ladder, heart pounding in my ears. The hatch above was secured with a simple latch that slid open under my desperate fingers. I pushed, feeling cool night air rush in as the heavy metal plate swung upward. I emerged into the darkened basement of a church, surrounded by stacked folding chairs and Sunday school supplies. Moonlight filtered through small ground-level windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. I turned back to help Daryl, but what I saw nearly stopped my heart. His flashlight lay abandoned at the base of the ladder, illuminating his legs as he climbed up. But something had hold of his ankle, a long, pale arm stretching up from the darkness below. The hand wasn't right, the fingers too numerous, too long, bending in impossible directions as they wrapped around Daryl's calf. "The vial!" Daryl shouted, his face contorted with pain. "In my pocket. Break it on the ground." I reached down, grabbing his jacket, feeling for the pocket. My fingers closed around a second glass vial. I pulled it out, dark liquid, almost black in the dim light, swirling inside like living smoke. "Do it!" Daryl screamed as the thing below gave a powerful yank, nearly pulling him back down. I smashed the vial on the concrete beside the hatch. The liquid splattered, but instead of spreading out, it seemed to sink into the ground, disappearing instantly. A high, inhuman, keening sound rose from the tunnel below, and the pale arm released Daryl's leg, withdrawing into the darkness. Daryl hauled himself up, collapsing onto the basement floor beside me. Without hesitation, I slammed the hatch shut and threw the bolt. For several long moments, we lay there in the darkness, our ragged breathing the only sound. Then, from below, came 3 distinct knocks on the metal hatch. Knock. 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 We both stared at the hatch, paralyzed. Another set of 3 knocks, more insistent this time. "Don't answer," Daryl whispered. "That's the first rule of Whitley Gap. Never answer when they knock in 3s. I nodded mutely, my entire body trembling with fear and exhaustion. After what seemed like an eternity, a different sound came from below. a frustrated screech followed by the slapping of retreating footsteps. Daryl's shoulders sagged in relief. "What was in that vial?" I asked when I finally found my voice. "Old coal mine remedy," Daryl said, examining the torn fabric of his pant leg. "Mixture of salt, iron filings, and graveyard dirt. Temporary barrier at best, but enough to make them back off." He struggled to his feet, wincing as he put weight on his injured leg. "We should get moving. Dawn's coming and we need to check on Nathan and Jim." The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten as we emerged from the church. The streets of Whitley Gap were deserted, the houses dark and silent. We limped back toward Wilder's Market, taking a circuitous route that kept us in the open, away from shadows and alleyways. "There are others like it, you know," Daryl said as we walked. "Towns with arrangements, places where the veil between worlds is thin." He glanced sideways at me. "Your wife, April, the aneurysm. Was it sudden? No warning signs?" I stopped walking, staring at him. "How do you know her name?" "I never told you." "Small town," he said, echoing Nathan's words from earlier. "But answer the question." "Yes," I replied cautiously. "It was sudden. She was fine that morning, then gone by afternoon." Daryl nodded as if confirming something to himself. "And did she ever mention strange dreams? Hearing voices? Losing time?" A cold feeling spread through my chest. "Why are you asking this?" "Because people don't just happen to move to Whitley Gap," Daryl said, his eyes sad but knowing. "They're drawn here. Called." "By what?" "By the Hollows. Or by those already taken." He gestured for us to continue walking. "I think you were meant to come here. I think something wanted you in that cabin on Pine Mountain Road." We rounded the corner, the grocery store coming into view. The parking lot was empty except for Nathan's battered pickup truck and my Honda. The loading dock stood open, the delivery truck nowhere to be seen. "I don't understand," I said, my mind reeling. "Are you saying April's death wasn't natural? That these Dots Hollows had something to do with it?" Daryl stopped at the edge of the parking lot, turning to face me. "I'm saying you have a choice to make. You can leave town today, drive away, and never look back. Try to forget everything you've seen." He paused, his eyes holding mine. "Or you can stay, learn the rules, find out why you were called here." The sun broke over the eastern ridge, spilling golden light across the valley. In the daylight, Whitley Gap looked almost normal, just another struggling small town nestled in the Appalachian Hills. But I knew better now. I knew what lurked beneath the surface, behind the everyday facade of Wilder's Market. "What would you do?" I asked quietly. Daryl's face was grim. If it were my wife, I'd want answers. From inside the store came a sudden, sharp sound, glass breaking. We both turned toward the noise. Through the front windows, I could see a figure moving inside, silhouetted against the rising sun. It stood unnaturally still for a moment, then slowly turned toward us. Nathan Powell stared out at us, his face expressionless. But even from this distance, I could see something was wrong with his eyes. They were completely black, like holes cut into reality. And he was smiling. "Don't move," Daryl whispered, slowly backing away from the store. "Don't let him see you're afraid." But I was afraid, terrified by the sight of Nathan's black eyes and unnatural smile. As we watched, he pressed his palm against the glass of the front door, leaving a dark, wet imprint that seemed to glisten in the morning light. "That's not Nathan anymore, is it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "No," Daryl confirmed. "We need to get to my truck. I keep emergency supplies there." We edged backward toward Daryl's faded blue Silverado parked near the edge of the lot. Inside the store, Nathan, or the thing wearing Nathan's face, tracked our movement, its head turning with mechanical precision. "What about Jim?" I asked. Daryl's expression tightened. "We need to assume the worst." We reached the truck, and Daryl fished keys from his pocket with shaking hands. As he unlocked the door, movement caught my eye. Nathan had disappeared from the front of the store. "He's gone," I hissed. "Get in. Now." Daryl yanked the driver's side door open and climbed in. I hurried around to the passenger side, scanning the storefront nervously. The moment I closed my door, a heavy thud sounded from the truck bed behind us. Something had jumped into it. Daryl jammed the key into the ignition and twisted. The engine sputtered, but didn't catch. Come on," he muttered, trying again. Slow footsteps moved along the truck bed, approaching the back window. On the third try, the engine roared to life. Daryl threw the truck into reverse, tires squealing as we shot backward. There was a thump and a screech as whatever was in the truck bed was thrown against the cab. I twisted in my seat to look through the rear window. Nathan's body lay sprawled in the truck bed, limbs bent at unnatural angles that should have been impossible with normal human anatomy. As I watched in horror, he began to right himself, bones audibly snapping back into place as he rose to all fours. His head rotated 180 degrees to face me directly, that same empty smile fixed on his features. "Jesus Christ," I breathed, recoiling from the sight. Daryl spun the wheel hard, throwing the truck into drive and accelerating toward the exit. Nathan's body slid toward the tailgate, but his hands, fingers now impossibly elongated, dug into the metal of the truck bed, anchoring him. "We can't let it stay attached," Daryl shouted over the roar of the engine. "The rifle under your seat, get it." I reached beneath me, fingers closing around cold metal. I pulled out an old lever-action hunting rifle, the wood stock worn smooth with age. "It's loaded," Daryl said, eyes fixed on the road as we careened onto Route 119. "Won't kill it, but might slow it down." I glanced back again. Nathan was clawing his way forward, those black eyes locked on me. His mouth had opened wider than any human mouth should, revealing rows of teeth like a shark's. With trembling hands, I rolled down my window and awkwardly positioned the rifle, trying to aim at the thing that had once been Nathan Powell. "I've never fired a gun before," I admitted, the rifle wavering in my grip. "Just pull the trigger," Daryl said grimly. "And don't hesitate. That's not your friend anymore." I squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against my shoulder, the report deafeningly loud in the confines of the truck cab. The shot went wide, splintering the corner of the truck bed. The thing wearing Nathan's face didn't even flinch. It continued its advance, mouth stretching impossibly wider. I worked the lever, chambering another round, and fired again. This time the bullet struck Nathan's shoulder, spinning him sideways. Black liquid that was definitely not blood sprayed from the wound, sizzling where it touched the metal of the truck. But still, he came on. "Aim for the head," Daryl shouted, swerving onto a narrow side road that wound up into the hills. "Between the eyes." I chambered another round, trying to steady my breathing. Nathan was nearly at the back window now, one elongated hand reaching for the glass. I centered the sights between those bottomless black eyes and squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck true, punching a neat hole in the center of Nathan's forehead. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his face seemed to collapse inward, the features melting like wax under a flame. The black eyes liquefied, running down his cheeks like tears. His mouth stretched in a silent scream as his entire head began to cave in on itself. What remained of Nathan's body convulsed once, then fell limp. As we took a sharp corner, it slid from the truck bed and tumbled onto the road behind us, already dissolving into a dark, viscous puddle. Did I kill him? I asked, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. Daryl's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Nathan was already gone, but you stopped the hollow wearing him. Temporarily, at least. We drove in silence for several minutes, climbing higher into the mountains. Pine trees crowded close to the road, their shadows stretching across the pavement. Eventually, Daryl pulled over at a scenic overlook, cutting the engine. Below us, Whitley Gap looked peaceful in the morning light. A small collection of buildings nestled in the narrow valley, smoke rising from a few chimneys, the church steeple gleaming white against the green hillsides. "We can't go back there," I said, still clutching the rifle like a lifeline. "Not yet," Daryl agreed. "There's somewhere else we need to go first." He pointed to a dirt road barely visible through the trees. "Old fire tower up that way. Been using it as a safe house for situations like this." 20 minutes later, we pulled up to a metal fire observation tower perched on one of the highest ridges in the area. The structure rose 60 feet above the summit, a small cabin at the top accessible by a series of metal staircases that zigzagged up the framework. "Not many people know it's still maintained," Daryl explained as we climbed the stairs. "Forest Service abandoned it officially back in the 90s when they switched to satellite monitoring for wildfires. The cabin at the top was small, but surprisingly well equipped. Solar panels on the roof powered a small refrigerator and electric lights. A ham radio sat on a desk beside topographic maps of the surrounding area. Gun racks lined one wall, holding rifles, shotguns, and boxes of ammunition. A wood stove occupied one corner, with a neatly stacked supply of firewood beside it. "My father established this place," Daryl said, securing the trapdoor we'd climbed through. "Called it the Watchtower. It's where we come when there's a breach." "How often does that happen?" I asked, setting the rifle down carefully. "Not often, maybe once every few years." Daryl moved to the windows, scanning the forest below with binoculars. "But it's getting worse. More frequent. Something's changed." I sank into a chair, exhaustion finally catching up with me. "The hollow that took Nathan. Will it come for us?" "Eventually," Daryl replied, still watching the forest. "But they don't like heights or open spaces. Prefer to stay underground or inside buildings where the shadows are deeper." He set down the binoculars and turned to face me. "Now we need to talk about you and why you're really here." "I told you why I came to Whitley Gap," I said defensively. "After April died." "You didn't choose Whitley Gap by accident," Daryl interrupted. "Nobody does. This place calls to people who've had contact with the hollow places." He pulled a thick ledger from a shelf and laid it on the table between us. "This is the town registry. Goes back to 1912, when my great-grandfather was mayor." He opened it, flipping through yellowed pages filled with neat handwriting. "Everyone who comes to Whitley Gap gets recorded. Their names, where they came from, why they claim they're here, and the real reason." He stopped at a page near the end, turning the book so I could see. My name was there, written in blue ink, along with the date I'd arrived and the address of my cabin. Beside it, in a column labeled Claimed Purpose, someone had written, "Escape after wife's death." But it was the final column that made my blood run cold. Under Actual Connection, a single word was written, "Marked." "What does that mean?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. "Marked how?" Daryl turned to another page, this one containing a rough sketch of a symbol, a circle with a vertical line bisecting it. Strange angular markings arrayed around the perimeter. "Seen this anywhere?" "Maybe on April." A birthmark, a scar, something that looked like a tattoo. A memory surfaced. April in our bathroom, studying her shoulder in the mirror, concerned about a strange circular mark that had appeared overnight. She'd scheduled a dermatologist appointment, worried it might be skin cancer, but she died 3 days before the appointment. She had something like that, I admitted. On her shoulder. It appeared a few weeks before she died. Daryl nodded grimly. The hollows mark those they plan to take. Sometimes the marks appear years before they come for the person. You're saying these things killed my wife? Caused her aneurysm? Anger flared within me, hot and sudden. Not exactly, Daryl said. The hollows don't care about our bodies. They want what's inside. Consciousness, soul, whatever you want to call it. The aneurysm was likely a side effect of them trying to create space for themselves. So they tried to take April, and it killed her instead. It happens sometimes. Not everyone is compatible. Daryl's voice softened slightly. The ones who aren't become beacons, drawing their loved ones to places like Whitley Gap, where the barriers are thinner. I stared at him, the implications sinking in. I've been dreaming about her since she died. Dreams where she's trying to tell me something, but I can't hear her. That's how it works, Daryl confirmed. The hollows use the connection between people, like bait. So I'm just another victim, lured here to be taken like Nathan was. Maybe. Or maybe there's another reason. Daryl returned to the window, gazing out at the forest below. Some people can fight back, resist the hollows, even drive them out. People with certain qualities. What qualities? Strength of will, clarity of purpose, or sometimes just sheer stubbornness. A faint smile crossed his face. My grandfather had it. Called it mountain grit. It's why he was able to make the bargain in the first place. The hollows respected him, feared him even. The ham radio on the desk suddenly crackled to life, static giving way to a voice. Daryl? You there? It's Jim. Jim Calloway. Over. Daryl lunged for the radio, snatching up the microphone. Jim? Where are you? Are you safe? Over. I'm at the church with Pastor Mike and a few others. That thing that came with the truck. It's not alone. There are more of them in town. Nathan's gone, and so are the Petersons from the hardware store. Over. How many people do you have with you? Over. Daryl's voice was tense. 11. All clean as far as we can tell. We've been checking for the signs like you taught us. Over. Stay put. The church ground will hold them off for now. We're at the watchtower. I'll contact the other safe houses, see who's accounted for. Over. There's something else, Daryl. Jim's voice lowered. They're gathering at Wilder's Market. Dozens of them. It's like they're waiting for something. Over. Daryl's eyes met mine, his expression grave. What time is sunset today? Over. 7:42 p.m. About 10 hours from now. Over. Keep the radio on. I'll be in touch. Over and out. Daryl set down the microphone, his face ashen. What happens at sunset? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. The barriers weaken at night, Daryl said. Always have. But once a year, on the anniversary of the mine collapse, they disappear entirely for a few hours. He turned to the calendar on the wall. Today's date was circled in red. And that's tonight. What does that mean? It means the hollows won't just be able to take people one by one. Daryl's voice was deadly serious. They'll be able to come through all at once, and nothing, not the church, not the safe houses, nothing, will be able to keep them out. So what do we do? I asked. Daryl opened a lockbox mounted to the wall, removing a folded paper sealed with wax. We use the contingency plan my grandfather created, a way to collapse the connections permanently. He broke the seal, unfolding the paper. but we'll need to go back to where it all started. The mine, I guessed. No, Daryl said, sliding the paper across the table to me. Your cabin. The paper Daryl had given me contained a hand-drawn map of my cabin, but with markings and annotations I didn't recognize. Dotted lines connected various points in and around the structure, forming a pattern that reminded me of a circuit diagram. X's marked specific locations, one in the center of the basement floor, another at the northeast corner of the property, a third under what appeared to be the front porch steps. What am I looking at? I asked, studying the faded ink. A containment diagram, Daryl explained. Your cabin sits on a convergence point, a place where the barrier between our world and theirs is particularly thin. He tapped the X in the basement. That's the main access point. The others are secondary bleeds. So my cabin is some kind of portal? More like a door that was improperly sealed. Daryl moved to a cabinet, retrieving several canvas bags which he began filling with supplies. When the mine collapsed in '58, the energy from the hollow places sought new pathways to the surface. Your cabin was built in '59 by a miner who survived the collapse, Elias Jenkins. Buford's relative? His father. Elias knew what he was doing, building on that spot. He designed the cabin specifically to contain the bleed, channeling it through controlled points that could be monitored. Daryl handed me one of the mal-filled bags, but after he died, the maintenance stopped. Buford never believed the old stories, thought his father was crazy. I peered into the bag. Salt, iron nails, small glass vials similar to what Daryl had used in the tunnel, bundles of dried herbs tied with twine, and a hunting knife with strange symbols etched into the blade. And we're going to what? Close these access points? We're going to try. Daryl checked his watch. But we need to move quickly. The sun's getting higher, which means the hollows will be retreating to dark places, like your basement. He unfolded a topographic map, tracing a route with his finger. We can't take the main roads. They'll be watching those. We'll need to go cross-country, through the old logging trails. It's longer but safer. We descended from the fire tower, loading our supplies into Daryl's truck. As we prepared to leave, Daryl paused, handing me a revolver from the gun rack. Smith & Wesson .357, he said. Iron bullets with salt cores. Won't kill a hollow, but it'll disrupt their form long enough for you to get away. 6 shots, so make them count. The weight of the gun was unfamiliar and uncomfortable in my hand, but I tucked it into my waistband, hoping I wouldn't need to use it. The logging road was little more than a rutted track winding through dense forest. Daryl drove with practiced ease, navigating around washouts and fallen branches. The truck's suspension groaned in protest as we bounced over rocks and through shallow creek crossings. How long have you known about all this? I asked, bracing myself against the dashboard as we lurched down a particularly steep section. My whole life, Daryl replied. My grandfather explained it to me when I was 12. Said someone in the family always had to know, had to maintain the balance. A bitter smile crossed his face. My father drank himself to death trying to forget. Left it all to me. And you just accepted it? Kept running the store, enforcing the rules, feeding these things? What choice did I have? Daryl's voice hardened. Leave? Let the whole town be taken? The bargain was made before I was born, but the consequences would fall on everyone if it broke. He swerved to avoid a fallen log. Besides, it's not like the hollows are all bad. The store never fails. Crops always produce. No one in Whitley Gap goes hungry or lacks for basic needs. At the cost of what? Living in fear? Human sacrifices when someone breaks a rule? It's a balance, Daryl insisted. Or it was, until recently. Something's changed in the last few months. The Hollows are getting more aggressive, more numerous. Rules that worked for decades aren't holding them back anymore. We fell silent as the truck labored up a steep incline, emerging suddenly from the tree line into a small clearing. Daryl stopped, cutting the engine. "We walk from here," he said. "Your cabin's just over that ridge. Better to approach quietly." We shouldered our bags and began hiking through the underbrush, moving from tree to tree, alert for any sign of movement. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No bird song, no rustling of small animals, just the soft crunch of our footsteps on fallen leaves and the distant murmur of wind in the treetops. As we crested the ridge, my cabin came into view in the small clearing below. From this distance, it looked peaceful. A simple one-story structure with a covered porch and metal roof, smoke curling from the stone chimney. I froze mid-step. "I didn't leave a fire going," I whispered. Daryl pulled me down behind a fallen tree, eyes fixed on the cabin. "Someone's there." We watched for several minutes. Nothing moved, but the smoke continued to rise from the chimney in a steady column. Finally, Daryl pointed to a trail that curved around to the back of the property. "We'll circle behind, coming through the trees where they won't be expecting us," he murmured. "Stay low and move quietly." We made our way around the perimeter of the clearing, using the dense forest as cover. As we approached the back of the cabin, I could see the small shed where Buford stored his maintenance tools, and beyond it, the storm cellar doors that led to the basement with the main access point marked on the map. The storm cellar doors were open, yawning like a dark mouth against the earth. "They're already inside," Daryl whispered. "We need to see what we're dealing with before we go in." We crept closer, staying within the tree line. A window on the back of the cabin provided a view into the kitchen. Daryl raised his binoculars, studying the interior. "I can see movement," he reported. "At least 2 figures. One of them is not right. Proportions are wrong." He handed me the binoculars. I raised them to my eyes, adjusting the focus. Through the slightly dirty window, I could make out 2 people in my kitchen. One was a woman I didn't recognize, short and heavy-set, standing unnaturally still beside the refrigerator. The other, my blood turned to ice water. The other was April. My wife, who I had buried 3 months ago, was standing in my kitchen, peering into the cast iron pot on the stove as if checking a recipe. That's April," I choked out, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the binoculars. "My wife." Daryl took them back, looking again. "No," he said firmly. "That's not your wife. It's a hollow wearing her form. They can do that. Take the appearance of the dead, especially those they've marked." "But how?" "She's buried in Louisville. They couldn't have her body." "They don't need physical remains, just memories, yours primarily. They're drawn to grief, to that connection that remains after death." Daryl's voice was tight with tension. "This changes things. If they're using her image, it means they know exactly who you are and why you're here." "Why am I here?" I demanded, tearing my eyes away from the cabin. "You keep saying I was drawn here, marked, connected to all this. Tell me why." Daryl hesitated, then reached into his jacket, pulling out a folded photograph. It showed a group of men standing in front of what looked like a mine entrance, wearing hard hats and carrying pickaxes. "Whitley Mine, 1957, he said. "The year before the collapse." He pointed to a man in the center of the group, tall, lean, with a serious expression. "Elias Jenkins, who built your cabin." Then his finger moved to another figure, younger, standing at the edge of the frame. "And that's your grandfather, Marcus." I stared at the photo in shock. My grandfather had died before I was born. All I knew about him came from my mother's occasional references, that he'd been a coal miner in Kentucky before moving to Ohio, where he met my grandmother. My grandfather worked in the Whitley mine. He was there the day they broke through to the hollow place, Daryl said. One of only 3 men in that excavation team who survived the initial contact. The other 2 died within a year. Madness, the official record said. But your grandfather escaped, moved away, started a new life. What does that have to do with me? The Hollows never forgot him. Never forgave him either. He was the one who warned the others, who started the evacuation before the full collapse. Daryl took back the photo. You have his blood, his resistance. That's why April was marked. They couldn't get to you directly, so they tried to use her as a conduit. And when Matt failed, they drew me here instead. Yes. Daryl's expression was grim. They want to finish what they started with your grandfather. But they also fear what you might be capable of, carrying his blood. Movement near the storm cellar caught my attention. A figure was emerging, tall and thin, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. The same entity from the delivery truck. "We need to move," Daryl whispered. "They're gathering, preparing for sundown." "What's the plan?" I asked, unable to tear my eyes away from the cabin where the thing wearing my dead wife's face was still visible through the window. The diagram shows anchor points, places where Elias built containment mechanisms into the structure. Daryl patted his bag. "We need to reach those points, reinforce them with the materials we brought. And how do we get past them?" Daryl's gaze hardened. "We don't. We go through them." He reached into his bag, pulling out what looked like a homemade pipe bomb. A metal cylinder wrapped in duct tape with a fuse protruding from one end. "Iron shrapnel, salt, and graveyard dirt," he explained. "It won't kill them, but it'll create enough chaos for us to get inside. Once there, you go for the basement while I secure the exterior points." "The basement?" "Where that thing just came from. The main access point is there. It's the key to everything." Daryl handed me a small cloth pouch. "This contains a seal written in the old language. Place it directly on the spot marked on the map. Then pour the contents of the red vial in a circle around it." I stared at the cabin, at the storm cellar where darkness waited, at the window where something wearing my wife's face stood in my kitchen. Fear and anger roared within me, but beneath them was something else. A determination I hadn't felt since April died, a clarity of purpose. "Let's end this," I said. Daryl nodded, striking a match. "When this goes off, run straight for the cellar. Don't stop, don't look back, and whatever happens, don't listen to her voice." He lit the fuse, counted to 3, and hurled the device toward the back steps of the cabin. The explosion tore through the quiet afternoon, sending splinters of wood and metal flying in all directions. The back steps of the cabin disintegrated in a cloud of dust and debris. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard inhuman shrieks of pain and anger. "Now!" Daryl shouted, already sprinting toward the storm cellar. I ran, focusing only on the open cellar doors ahead. Behind me, chaos erupted. The thing wearing the heavy-set woman's form burst from the back door, its body contorting in ways human joints shouldn't allow. The thin man in the baseball cap was writhing on the ground, dark liquid seeping from wounds where iron shrapnel had embedded in his flesh. I didn't look for April's doppelganger. I couldn't. Daryl reached the cellar first, yanking a flashlight from his belt and plunging into the darkness below. I followed, nearly tumbling down the steep wooden steps in my haste. The air in the cellar was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, a metallic, ozone-like scent that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Lock the doors," Daryl yelled, already moving deeper into the basement. I turned back, grabbing for the interior latches of the cellar doors. As I reached for them, a hand shot through the narrowing gap. A woman's hand, with my wife's wedding ring still on the finger. "Honey?" April's voice, exactly as I remembered it. "Why are you running from me? I've been looking everywhere for you." Something inside me cracked at the sound of her voice. For a heartbeat, I hesitated. "It's not her." Daryl's voice cut through my momentary weakness. "Remember what she really is." With a surge of desperate strength, I slammed the doors, crushing the fingers caught between them. Instead of blood and broken bones, black ichor sprayed from the severed digits, sizzling where it touched the metal hinges. I threw the heavy wooden bar across the doors, just as something slammed into them from the outside, making the entire structure shudder. "It won't hold them long," Daryl warned, sweeping his flashlight across the basement. "We need to find the access point." The basement was larger than I remembered from my brief inspection when I'd first rented the cabin. Rough stone walls supported by ancient timber beams enclosed a space about 30 feet square. The floor was packed earth in most places, with a section of poured concrete near the furnace. Shelves lined the walls, holding dusty mason jars, abandoned tools, and cardboard boxes whose contents I'd never bothered to examine. "There," Daryl said, pointing to the center of the room where a perfect circle of flat stones was set into the dirt floor. "That's it." We approached cautiously. The stone circle was about 6 feet in diameter, each stone carved with symbols similar to those on the map. In the very center was a metal plate embossed with the same bisected circle design I'd seen in the town registry. "Your grandfather helped design this," Daryl explained, kneeling at the edge of the circle. "After he escaped Whitley Gap, he came back secretly to work with Elias. They created this seal to contain what was coming through. So what do we do now? Reinforce it. The original binding is failing." Daryl opened his bag, removing bundles of herbs, vials of liquid, and small iron tokens shaped like crosses. "I'll start the preparatory work. You need to get the other anchor points." He handed me the map again, indicating 2 X marks on opposite sides of the basement. There should be smaller metal plates embedded in the walls at these locations. Place a pouch and 3 iron nails at each one, then pour salt in a half circle in front. I took the supplies and headed to the nearest marked spot, using my phone's flashlight to examine the rough stone wall. Sure enough, partially hidden behind a wooden shelf, I found a small metal plate with the same symbol. I placed the pouch against it, hammering in the 3 iron nails around its edges with a rock I found nearby. As I poured the salt in a semicircle, it seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Above us, something heavy crashed against the floor, making dust rain down from the ceiling beams. "They're inside the cabin," I called to Daryl, moving quickly to the second anchor point. "Hurry," he replied, not looking up from his work at the central circle. He had arranged his materials in a complex pattern around the metal plate and was reciting something under his breath. Not quite a prayer, but something rhythmic and old-sounding. I found the second plate behind the furnace, repeating the process with the pouch, nails, and salt. As I finished, a new sound reached us, a soft, melodic whistling coming from directly above, the same eerie tune I'd heard in the store. "Daryl," I warned. "There." The cellar doors exploded inward in a shower of splinters and broken metal. Silhouetted against the fading daylight outside were 3 figures. The thin man, now moving with jerky, broken motions. The heavy-set woman, her body twisted at impossible angles. And April, or the thing wearing her form, standing perfectly still at the center. "Don't stop!" Daryl shouted, continuing his ritual at the circle. "Whatever happens, complete the seal." The 3 figures started down the cellar steps, moving with an unnatural synchronicity. I pulled the revolver from my waistband, aiming at the thin man who led the way. "Stay back," I warned, my voice shaking. April's lips curved into a smile that was nothing like my wife's. "You won't shoot me," she said, her voice a perfect intonation that tore at my heart. "You couldn't even bring yourself to throw away my clothes." She was right. I'd packed up her things in boxes but couldn't bear to dispose of them, leaving them stacked in our Louisville apartment when I fled. "That's not April," I told myself aloud, shifting my aim toward her. "My wife is dead." "Am I?" the thing wearing her face asked, taking another step down. Or did I just find my way back through the dark? Back to you? She extended her hand, my wife's wedding ring glinting in the dim light. "I've been so lost waiting for you to find me." My hand trembled on the gun. Behind me, Daryl's chanting grew louder, more urgent. "The final anchor point," he shouted between phrases. "Northeast corner, go." I backed away from the steps, keeping the gun trained on the approaching figures. The northeast corner was the furthest from the entrance, behind a stack of moldering cardboard boxes. I would have to cross the basement, passing close to the central circle where Daryl worked. "I'll cover you," Daryl said, pulling his own revolver. "Go!" I turned and ran, hearing gunshots behind me as Daryl fired at the intruders. Their inhuman screams echoed off the stone walls. I pushed aside the boxes, frantically searching for the metal plate. "There's nowhere to run," April's voice called, closer now. "Why are you fighting this? Don't you want us to be together again?" I found the plate half hidden behind an old water heater, quickly pressing the pouch against it and hammering in the nails with the butt of my revolver. As I reached for the salt in my bag, something cold wrapped around my ankle. Looking down, I saw a hand emerging from the dirt floor, fingers elongated into claw-like appendages that dug into my flesh. I cried out, trying to pull free as more hands erupted from the ground, dozens of them, reaching, grasping, pulling. "It's fighting back!" Daryl shouted from across the room. "The seal! Complete it!" I emptied the salt pouch with one desperate motion, forming a rough semicircle around the plate. The effect was immediate. The hands recoiled from the barrier as if burned, sinking back into the earth with a chorus of hisses and moans. At the central circle, Daryl had constructed an elaborate arrangement of symbols using iron filings, salt, and what looked like dried blood. The metal plate was now glowing with a dull red light, pulsing like a heartbeat. "It's working," he called. "We just need to—" His words cut off as the heavy-set woman's form lunged at him, knocking him away from the circle. They crashed into a shelving unit, sending mason jars shattering across the floor. I ran back toward the center, pulling the red vial from my pocket as instructed. The thin man blocked my path, his body now barely recognizable as human. Limbs bent and multiplied, head twisted completely backward, black ichor dripping from every orifice. I fired the revolver at point-blank range. The iron bullet tore through his chest, leaving a smoking hole. He staggered back but didn't fall. I fired again and again, each shot pushing him further from the circle until the gun clicked empty. Daryl was struggling with the heavy-set woman, her arms now elongated into tentacle-like appendages that wrapped around his throat. I grabbed a broken shelf board and swung it at her, connecting with a wet thud that would have killed a normal human. She merely turned toward me, her face splitting into a vertical maw lined with needle teeth. "The vial!" Daryl gasped, breaking free of her grip. "Complete the circle." I sprinted for the central stone circle, uncorking the red vial as I ran. The liquid inside was thick and dark, smelling of rust and salt. I began pouring it around the perimeter of the stones, completing the circuit Daryl had begun. "No!" April's voice cried out behind me. I turned to see her standing at the edge of the circle, looking exactly as she had the morning of her death, hair pulled back, cheeks flushed with emotion, eyes bright with tears. "Please don't do this. You'll trap me here forever." My hand froze, the vial still half full. "It's trying to stop you," Daryl warned, still grappling with the other creature. "That's not April." "But what if it is?" I whispered, doubt crushing my resolve. What if some part of her is in there? April's face softened with the smile I'd fallen in love with. "I'm still here, baby. I found a way back to you. Please don't send me away again." She reached toward me, stepping into the circle. As her foot crossed the boundary, the symbols Daryl had arranged flared with sudden light. April's expression contorted in pain, her form flickering like a bad television signal, momentarily revealing something dark and writhing beneath the human disguise. The truth hit me like a physical blow. Whatever stood before me contained nothing of my wife. It was a hollow thing, empty of everything except hunger and malice, wearing her face like a mask. With a cry of rage and grief, I upended the remaining liquid, completing the circle. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The ground beneath us trembled, and a high-pitched keening filled the air. The three creatures convulsed simultaneously, their human forms melting away to reveal their true nature. Seething masses of darkness shot through with veins of sickly yellow light. "The words," Daryl shouted, throwing a folded paper toward me. "Read them." I caught the paper, unfolding it with shaking hands to reveal text in a language I didn't recognize. But as my eyes fell on the strange symbols, I found I could pronounce them. The sounds rising from some ancestral memory buried in my bones. As I spoke the final syllable, the metal plate at the center of the circle erupted with blinding white light. A force like a shockwave rippled outward, throwing me off my feet. The creatures screamed, not with human voices now, but with a sound like tearing metal and breaking glass. The light grew to unbearable intensity, forcing me to shield my eyes. Through my fingers, I watched as the three entities were pulled toward the circle, as if caught in a powerful vortex, their forms stretching and distorting before being sucked down into the metal plate at the center. With a final, thunderous concussion, the light vanished, plunging the basement into darkness. Silence fell, broken only by my ragged breathing and Daryl's pained groans. "Did it work?" I asked, my voice hoarse from the words I'd spoken. Daryl dragged himself to the edge of the circle, examining the now dormant metal plate. "Yes," he confirmed. "The breach is sealed." "For how long?" "If we did it right, forever." He slumped back against the wall, exhaustion plain on his face. "Your grandfather would be proud." Outside, through the shattered cellar doors, the last light of day was fading from the sky. But for the first time in months, the darkness held no terror for me. 2 months have passed since that night in the basement. Whitley Gap is different now. Quieter, more ordinary. The strange rules that once governed Wilder's Market have faded into irrelevance, replaced by the mundane concerns of a small-town grocery store. Inventory, staffing, competition from the Dollar General. I stayed, surprising myself and probably Daryl too. When the dust settled and the shadows retreated, I found I couldn't leave. Something in the air here speaks to me. Not the malevolent whispers of the hollows, but something older and more honest. The mountains themselves, perhaps, or the echo of my grandfather's footsteps on this same soil. Jim Calloway survived, along with most of the townspeople who had taken shelter in the church. We lost 7 residents that night, their bodies found wandering the woods days later, vacant-eyed and unresponsive, eventually succumbing to what the county coroner diplomatically called unknown neurological events. Nathan wasn't among them. Whatever had been wearing his form wasn't connected to his actual body. According to Daryl, the real Nathan had likely been gone for weeks before I arrived, taken during the late night at the store when he'd broken one of the rules. The cabin on Pine Mountain is mine now, properly mine. Buford Jenkins signed over the deed after Daryl explained the heavily edited version of what happened. That place always gave me the creeps, Buford admitted as he handed me the papers. Dad used to say it was especially built. Guess he was right after all. I've been renovating it, stripping away decades of neglect, reinforcing the foundations, and maintaining the anchor points as Daryl taught me. The basement has been cleaned out, the central circle now covered by a hand-woven rug gifted to me by Pastor Mike's wife. Its patterns subtly echoing the symbols beneath, a reminder hidden in plain sight. Daryl and I check the seals monthly, a ritual that's become something between a maintenance chore and a religious observance. We don't speak much during these inspections, but there's an understanding between us, guardians of a secret that's shaped this town for generations. The store has changed too. The meat department lights stay on all night now. Aisle 7 is just another aisle, stocked with paper towels and cleaning products. The night shift rules have been reduced to standard operating procedures, stocking priorities, break schedules, inventory counts. Nothing supernatural remains, at least not on the surface. Sometimes, when I'm working the late shift, I imagine I hear whistling from the far end of the store. But it's just the wind in the eaves or the old refrigeration unit cycling on. At least, that's what I tell myself. I visit April's grave when I can make the trip back to Louisville. I talk to her there, really talk to her, about everything that happened. About the Hollows and the cabin and my grandfather's legacy. About moving forward while keeping her memory sacred. The real her, not the twisted echo the Hollows created. Last night, as I was closing up the store, Daryl handed me a small wooden box with the bisected circle carved into its lid. "Your grandfather left this with my father," he explained. "Said it should go to his grandson when the time was right." Inside was a pocket watch, brass casing tarnished with age, hand stopped at 2:13. A note tucked beneath it read simply, "Some doors stay closed, only if someone remembers to check the locks." I wear the watch now, though it doesn't tell time. It doesn't need to. Its purpose is different, a reminder that some rules still matter, some boundaries must still be maintained, and every night at 2:13, I check the locks, just to be sure. Because in Whitley Gap, some things are worth being careful about.